Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me Tariq Ramadan broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, why are Muslims represented as the bad guys in Western movies?
Come with me. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.
Muslim characters have long been portrayed as villains in Western movies. This representation began after World War II and upon the creation of Israel, when Hollywood started saturating world viewers with films portraying Muslims and Arabs as violent characters. Big production corporations, supported by Israeli lobbies in the United States, have also helped in constructing this stereotypical image about Muslims in Western movies. Professor Jack Shaheen, who authored the book Real Bad Arabs: How Hollywood Vilifies a People, pointed out that one reason these negative images and stereotypes of Arabs and Muslims continue is politics.
One reason we've not been allowed to empathize with any Palestinian on the silver screen is due to two Israeli producers, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus. These two filmmakers created an American company called Canon, and they released in a period of 20 years at least 30 films which vilify all things Arab, particularly Palestinians.
A report by the Islamic Human Rights Commission argues that films as diverse as The Siege, the Disney film Aladdin, and the British comedy East is East have helped demonize Muslims as violent, dangerous, and threatening.
Islamophobia now is a part of our psyche. Words such as Arab and Muslim are perceived as threatening words. And if the words are threatening, what about the images that we see in the cinema and on our television screens?
This week's Islam and Life asks the question, why are Muslims represented as the bad guys in Western movies?
If we look at what is happening in the West, the perception of Muslims and the understanding of what Islam is all about, the perception is quite negative. So this is the reality in real life. In our civil societies, in the Western societies, the perception is bad. But it's not only coming from politics or the first dimension of politics. If we look at movies and the way the Muslims are portrayed, it's very negative and very often negative. As it was said, it's coming from after the Second World War, and over the last 10 years, what we have seen on TV, what we have seen within movies, it's quite negative, and the Arabs, the Muslims are represented as the bad guys. Why is it so? It's not only something which has to do with entertainment. Behind the scene, there are political concerns, political games and strategies, and we have to understand that movies, Hollywood is also politically driven, and to try to understand how it is, and in which way, in fact, in the future, Muslims and people being involved in this, in arts and in entertainment, should play a role, because it's very, very powerful in the way it's shaping minds, understandings, and perceptions. So why is it the case? How it could be dealt with? These are important questions. And to answer these questions, I'm joined by Arzu Merali, who is the head of research at the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Thank you for being with us. I've seen the clip. We know that in real life, so to speak, the perception of Islam and Muslims is quite negative. But that's very important to understand. It's not only coming from politics and daily life. It's also coming from the perceptions and the way this is, in fact, spread around through movies and entertainment. So, first question: what is the state of affairs? How do you understand, and what can we say about the situation?
I think if we look at the situation, let's speak specifically about Hollywood. Okay, this is still, if you like, the major movie distributor of the world. We have Bollywood, which has its own issues with regard to Islamophobia, unfortunately, these days, but it's another thing. Hollywood still maintains a kind of cultural dominance. You know, it's still the aspirational set of movies, if you like, or movie production that the world looks to in terms of setting its cultural values around and its entertainment values. Now, this is something which affects people's psyche almost unconsciously, okay? People watch movies to unwind generally. Of course, there are very serious movies and so on that people want to get a message from, but that's not really the main thing. So essentially, we're looking at a situation now where, I mean, you mentioned in the last 10 years this sort of extremities of Muslim bad guys. But actually, Muslim bad guys have really also been villain of choice for maybe 20, 30 years. So perhaps, the day 9/11 happened, there was already a settled subconscious idea. We knew they were like that. We've had movies going back to sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when this kind of, mass of Arabs, violent, misogynistic, cruel, terroristic eventually, were already kind of set in the back of people's minds. So when something happened, it was proof of, if you like, a fictional background.
But this is an important point, because very often we tend to think, after what happened in New York, it started, which is not true. No. It started much before that. Mm-hmm. It's, even once I was talking with someone working at the State Department and say, the problem that you have, you Muslims, is really what is coming from Hollywood, because there is a very powerful political trend, and he was referring to Zionism, he was referring to the people who are supporting Israel. And then the way you are portrayed in this business is quite negative. So this could be one of the reasons. It's not the only reason. How would you explain that, in fact, it's not after September 11, it's much before? So what are the main causes explaining that?
I think we have to set Hollywood in the context of it being the media producer of a dominant culture, the dominant culture of the United States. Yeah. And as much as Muslims are very, very seriously and badly affected now, I think we have to also understand this is not something exceptional to Muslims. Okay, so the cultural production of the United States has always been about a dominant culture, a dominant ethnicity, dominant, albeit secularized religious values, so on and so forth. So this, many communities have had similar experiences. The black community, the Native American communities, these have all been people who've been marginalized, demonized through this kind of media production. Now, set against that all the political pressures which we've already seen in the VT and so on, and you've got a culmination now of the last 30-odd years of that Muslim dynamic being very, very powerful within the films that come out, and the effect of that is massive. We already have negativity in, the news broadcasts and so on, which is slightly different. But the thing is, even though, people are intelligent and they can decode things, at the end of the day, when people sit down generally, there's been many studies done about this, they don't sit down and actually interrogate everything they watch.
Yes.
The theory of cognitive balance.
In an easy way, yes.
Exactly. The theory of cognitive balance is if you're seeing something that reinforces something you already have in the back of your mind, it just reinforces further.
Exactly.
That affects all of us.
But you are talking about something which is, once again, is that Hollywood is powerful, is the dominant culture. Still remember, for years, we had something which was the perception that, for example, the black, actors and the people who were representing blackness in the United States of America were having difficulties entering in these worlds. And then we had people, and it started to change with, we still have now few, important movie actors. Denzel Washington is the well-known one now, and working in ethical movies and all this. So something has changed still, and it's still the dominant. They were not representing the dominant. They were just facing something which was real structural discrimination and racism in this business. It's still the case in Hollywood. It's still the case, even though we have people coming. Why is it now that when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to Arabs, it's easier now to be an African American in the movie business today than to be an Arab. The perception of the Arab is going to be, you will get the bad guy character. Why is it so? And could it change?
Everything can change. I think as believers we have to believe in that, and we know that it can happen.
But in Hollywood,
In Hollywood, I think we have to look at, again, the past experiences. Okay, so the politics drove a lot of the different representations. So you had a civil rights movement, and the demonization was very strong during that. Now, yes, there are more black faces in Hollywood, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Hollywood is less racist. It can be more, many people have argued that it's actually just a more sophisticated type of racism. Sadly, Denzel Washington is in one of the movies we very heavily criticize in our book, The Siege, which is a real shame because he seems to be a very principled actor otherwise. The issues around participation, yes, there are issues about the fact that there should be more black faces, more Muslim faces, more everybody in every institution.
The diversity of the society should be there. Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily change the nature of the institution, because if institutions are structurally problematic, whether it's racist, Islamophobic, sexist, etc., just adding more of any minority group and sort of stirring isn't going to fix it. They're still going to be producing according to that dominant narrative. So this is also the bind that a lot of the black community are in, that, you know, you're kind of going into the movie industry, but you're actually still churning out not particularly ethical movies. You know, maybe the bad guy just changed, but you know, the problems just shifted. So it's not helpful really for Muslims just to aspire to kind of get in there and become, if you like, the new black. And there'll be somebody else to demonize, you know. It's about actually changing the culture, which is much more difficult. It's a phenomenal task. It's a generational task.
Yes, let us talk about this, because even, you know, for the black faces that were there, we talked about Denzel Washington and others, that it started with some important figures. They were very often criticized as being, you know, the token faces of, you know, this business. Oh, they are using you. In fact, you are confirming the very essence of everything. And some Arabs that are accepting to be involved are very often confirming what is happening. What should be done, in fact, at the end of the day? In Hollywood, and not only in Hollywood, because we can think also of having competing, you know, trends within the entertainment business. What should be done by the Arabs and the Muslims? Because at the end of the day, it's very powerful. And we tend to underestimate the power of the entertainment business, making millions, and as you said, the psyche is very much, because the people are watching a film unprotected, in fact, intellectually, so they take emotionally lots of things that are confirming fears and impressions and emotional takes. So what can we do?
I think one of the first things, and it almost seems obvious, but it's actually sometimes we've often confronted this in our work, is the fact that I think Muslims, Arabs, disenfranchised people need to start understanding about structure and structural discrimination. We don't always see that. We do often think, if only we could show ourselves in a certain light, whether it's to the news cameras, whether we could make a movie that would show Muslims or whoever in their true light, that somehow this would sort of fix the situation. I think we need to have an understanding of what we're up against, you know.
Yes, what do you mean